Good day. Welcome to the Strong Ambition podcast. And today we're going to dive into my DEXA scan, which is essentially a scan that figures out your body fat percentage. And this is considered really the gold standard for determining someone's body composition. And I have a lot of good information in here, some good, some bad, some ugly. And I want to break it down with you so we can go over the things I've learned from it. And I want to give you some tangible lessons that you can use for your own training and health. So I go to a place called Body Measure, and I've gone there actually 6 times now. So I've made some friends there, and I know the owners, and they're actually going to come onto the podcast in a couple of weeks because they have some great information from how they run that place, plus the new things that they're adding to it. But what I love about this place is they do a great job of breaking down really important information that you can get from a DEXA scan. And in this one, I'm able to really see some awesome information, but also some things I really need to pay attention to for health. So we're going to break down everything. I'm going to go over my body fat percentage, which is just the tip of the iceberg. And we're going to go into some details of what type of fat I have, whether it's good or bad. And then we're going to talk about my lean mass and how that's grown in a great way in some specific details on how I was able to grow my body. And I will give you some tips that I've learned from this in a good way and some things that I know I need to work on and things you might need to work on yourself. So let's start at the top and let's begin with body fat percentage. And so from previous body fat percentages, this one was unfortunately a higher one. I was at 14.9% body fat. In the previous years, I had actually done better during my build phase to maintain a leaner physique, but it's not my highest body fat percentage I've ever had for them. The first time I ever went to them was in 2018, and I remember this distinctly because it taught me how much the skin fold percentage can actually be off. So skin folds is a way that you can do body fat percentage. And when I was getting them done in the gym, it was a way for me to have a sense of where my body fat percentage is. But then I went and got my DEXA scan and I was much higher. It was funny because my boss at the time, AJ Zeglin, he did my body fat percentage. And I also had another colleague, Chris Aguirre, do it. And so AJ had me, I think, at 15% body fat, roughly. Chris had me at 17. And according to this, I was at 18.6% body fat. So we were underestimating routinely how much it was, but that ended up being a much more normal result. Whenever I do skin folds on someone and they get a DEXA scan, very commonly the DEXA scan is higher. But I didn't do another body composition for many years until I got into doing my bodybuilding show. And then I started doing a end of build phase body composition and end of cut phase body composition so I could just be more accurate. And so the first one that I did was before my bodybuilding show in 2013, and I was at 13.6% body fat, or 13.4% body fat, sorry, which is pretty good. And especially considering that when I got that skin fold done by AJ, I didn't think I held that much body fat, but I was holding in much more than I realized. And so it goes to show that even in a build phase, when I am eating more of a calorie surplus, I was doing a good job staying lean, and I was pretty proud of that. And then when I did my cut, I did a bodybuilding show. And so that was this, it's kind of an outlier. I got at 6.6% body fat on DEXA scan, which is really fucking lean. And it was, unhealthy lean. That's what you're trying to do for the competition. So I really pay attention more to the build phase. And so the build after that, I was able to put on even more muscle tissue. And it's hard because you can't really, I can't compare much previous to that. I don't have the data as far as what the DEXAs offer me. I have some skin fold data, but I see this as being kind of almost a different measure. It's just more accurate, right? So then my build phase last year, and when I had done it around, I believe it was around February, so it was a little later, and I was at 13.5% body fat, so just a little bit more. And I did have more lean mass. And then the cut there, I did around 11.8% body fat. So this was just before the summer. I didn't get as lean as I'd hoped, but I got leaner. And now I'm at 14.9. So I went up a fair bit. Now, there's a lot I want to say about this body fat percentage because it is, again, one of the highest I've been in now 3 years. I think one of the first points I want to make is that I knew I was going to end up having a hard time staying leaner, because I had set out a mission to not do any mini cuts. And every other time I did a build phase, I always allowed a mini cut. I typically would do one in October because I enjoyed the summer too much. The one year I even did one in December. I think last year I did one in December. And when you take a whole month or so to just get leaner, it makes a difference because you lose, a couple pounds of body fat, maybe 3 or 4 pounds. And so that would make sense why I was able to stay lean. And this year, I kind of oathed it that I'm like, you got to try to stay as lean as you can because I don't want to mess up my building. Because anytime you go into a mini cut, you're stalling your muscle building. And it's not for everyone, but as an experienced lifter, for me to build muscle and to lose body fat, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be incredibly slow. I would have to be at a very slight deficit, and it would be very, very hard to build muscle in that environment. The people who can build muscle and lose body fat at the same time are people who are new to it for the most part. So I knew that if I wanted to build, I had to be predominantly in a slight surplus or at very least near maintenance, calorie maintenance. And it's interesting that more data is coming out to see that is you can do some building in calorie maintenance. And so I would usually try to stay around 27 to 3,000 calories, as it would be around that range. And I did use a strategy to try to stay leaner. And so my strategy was more so to do slight deficits rather than doing full mini cuts. Anytime I talked about this in my last podcast, I want to go over it again. So anytime that I would typically, feel the need to want to do a deficit, I would actually just try to plan it out where if I'm in a week one of a program, which is almost like a deload, but not quite, where I just know I need to lower my volume. I'm getting really sore and I've done a good job ramping up. So now I know that my hypertrophy stimulus is actually just smaller and I don't need as many calories for recovery. I would then go into a slight deficit. So let's say that my calorie maintenance is around 2,700 calories. I'm not going to go full into an aggressive deficit of like 2,200 calories or 2,000 calories, but I'll eat around 23 to 2,400 calories for about 5 days. That was enough to just make me feel leaner and make me feel lighter and to watch the scale go down several times. So it was kind of like a mini cut, but it wasn't aggressive enough where I don't think it really did much to my muscle building, but it was enough to keep me leaner as I thought it did a pretty good job throughout the fall. Now, I don't have much evidence to support this, but I will just mention that I am fairly certain most of this came from the holidays. And that's really my second point is holidays are holidays. I went in, probably I'm going to bet I was around 13% body fat before the holidays. I distinctly remember a point where I was very busy throughout the week and I thought I was more trying to eat a little bit ad libitum and not always calorie track some meals, but kind of go by feel for others. And I was having a hard time actually eating enough. It was the first time in my life where I'm like, I'm not eating enough. But I was, a lot of steps, a lot of training. And I also got better at paying attention to satiety and knowing when I'm full. And that took like 6 months for me to get to that point, by the way. So it wasn't an easy thing. But there's a lot of these, things like eating high fiber foods, high protein foods, having, pop throughout the day and just getting into a routine where I knew these foods would leave me full. And so that would leave me full. And I actually was having such a high output of high steps. So I needed actually more to totally hit that calorie goal. And it was just before the holidays where I was actually watching my weight go down when I was trying to eat a lot. First time ever in my life. I hope to get there again one day. Which was funny because it was just bittersweet. I'm like, hey, I'm here. I'm going to have to cut right away. And that's just what it is. But with that being said, then I'm telling you, I was at I want to say 213 or 212. This is just before the holidays. My weight's coming down in a weird way. And then after the holidays, I was 222. So and not all of that is body fat, but a decent amount of it came from indulgence, right? Over the course of a couple of weeks. So that had a big influence on those numbers. The fact that I didn't do any slight deficits and, just enjoying the holidays. I think that's just sometimes happens to people. And I think that's the other point I really want to make about the body fat percentage number is that it doesn't hurt me like it used to. If you talked to me a couple of years ago when I was, really getting into body composition, trying to do the cut for the bodybuilding show, and even the year after, that number would have hurt me a lot more. I think I'm just now amongst a lot more colleagues within my mentorship for online training that I just don't pay attention to it as much. I don't pay attention to the people who are very focused on body composition, especially when you look at the data of whether you're trying to live a long, healthy life or you're even trying to find a partner. Because when you look at actually what's really interesting, the data on what people find more attractive, it's higher body fat percentage than you would assume. And I did a post about this, and it was really interesting to find the research that the average male will find a female around 20% to 30% body fat more attractive. But the fitness models are all below 18% body fat. And for females, we'll find the males more attractive around 15 to 20% body fat or higher. And again, the athletes and all the lean and jacked people are even below 10%. So if it's not for a partner, and this just as an on top of this, like I straight up know talking to Angelina, my partner said many times she likes big guys. I know some of her exes. Like, what am I holding on to this for? Why am I? And this was literally the question I asked myself, which was a really big shift in my personality. I think in a positive way. Why am I trying to be a skinny guy? I'm not one. I'm good at being big. Be big, be strong, take up space. And I've heard other women say this, take up space. And, I totally appreciated it, but I didn't feel it. And now I feel it. Now I'm there and I'm appreciating that, buy bigger shirts. It's okay. My body isn't good at being lean. And it doesn't mean I won't try to get lean. I actually think the act of going through weight loss and going through a deficit is mentally and psychologically really healthy. So if I just always did surplus maintenances throughout my life, I'm going to continue to gain a lot of body fat. And if I just never try to withhold, I think I'm missing a practice that actually helps me as a person. I want to do this thing, but I won't. That act right there, that little willing yourself away from something is actually mentally a really healthy thing. And so when I went into this deficit, I didn't like it at the start. I'm like, remember, this is good for you. This is good practice for you to get used to just being able to will yourself to do something that is mildly uncomfortable. So it's been a big shift in my mind to realize that I don't have to be the leanest I need to, that I imagined I need to, not compared to who I was. I guess I had this image in my mind that I had to be 10% body fat in order to achieve happiness the rest of my life. And that was going to be the goal. But then it's like, who is it for? Because it doesn't make sense who it's for, especially because it'd be different if I aspired to be a online coach for bodybuilders. That makes sense. Then I should be jacked and lean all the time. Those aren't the people I'm even trying to attract and to work with. I want to help the everyday person feel great about their fitness and physique. I don't need to intimidate them with the six-pack abs all the time. I definitely want to be an inspiration. I definitely want to be above average. And I want to be leaner than 14 to 15% body fat, even in my build phase. I do. But I don't have to try to achieve these crazy standards because there's actually not much gained there. And I want to actually even mention one of my colleagues that's been on here, Mitch Calvert, especially when we talk about health and longevity. He sits around 20% body fat and he has a resting heart rate of 40 beats per minute. My goodness, that guy is way healthier than I am. Like my resting heart rate's around 60. It should be better. I can't do a lot of cardio because of my knee, but he is healthy. He is going to live a long time. And this is the other thing is like within the research, when they look at longevity and living longer, it's been up to 22% body fat for males. And there's something to even be said about the correlation of lifestyle when you're thinking about how someone lives longer. So I think there's something to be said about body fat percentage and how it relates to how you live your life. And the reason why I'm saying this is just imagine the person who stays at 10% body fat, let's say tries to, because some people can walk around 10% body fat. I think my brother does. Like some people are built like that. But I also wonder about the person who tries really hard to stay lean their whole life and actually has to hold back from a lot of social experiences. They can't go out with their friends, or they're just not, eating treats. They're holding back from family gatherings. And one of the biggest impacts and one of the best lessons about living a long, healthy life that I've learned in the last couple of years is relationships. It's one of the most impactful. And so, as much as we want to say body fat percentage, I think relationships is almost higher. So, in the event that someone has 15 to 20% body fat as a male, maybe it's 20 to 30% as a female, and they are just literally allowing themselves to go out and have fun more often and be happy, maybe there's something to that, right? So I think I just reflect on this number so differently than I used to last couple of years, even. And it doesn't scare me. When I got that number initially, it didn't, I thought it would have rattled me. It's like, actually, I kind of feel softer, but I'm okay with it. And so for yourself, when you're trying to set your own standard, when you're thinking about your body fat percentage, really try to understand that it should be about how you feel. It should be how you feel about it, not how you think others will feel. And you kind of should be open to it, like open to, is my body fat, am I going to feel great at, let's say you're at 20% now, are you going to feel great at 15, at 10? I'll even say again for my friend Mitch Calvert, he went from 20 to 13. He said it was unsustainable. He said it was terrible. I feel pretty good around 13. And so it's so relative to a person for what it means to be at that body fat percentage. So for yourself, really consider, what does the number really mean, especially when you consider quality of life as well. Now, that's kind of how I've reflected on it in a positive way, but there is an important number here when it comes to body fat that is not pretty. It's not a good number. So there's something called visceral fat. And visceral fat is the fat that surrounds your organs. And what's really interesting about visceral fat is it's basically, I want to say, almost impossible to detect from skin folds. And I have a system where if someone carries a bit more weight in their stomach, and even the skin folds can't measure it very well, using a waist, neck, and hip ratio can sometimes work. And I'll even say, when I compare the skin folds that Angelina did to me just this last week to the DEXA scan, I was actually closer with that. When I basically take the average of my skin fold and my waist, neck, and hip ratio, you put those together, I have an average around 15%. And that's actually very close to the number that we got for the DEXA scan. So it's interesting that sometimes I see the two team up well for certain people, but some people it still doesn't work. And there's certain people that if you do skin folds, I've had clients be at like 25% body fat on DEXA scan, they're at like 35, 40, because it's all internal. Now, what's important about this is I did not know that visceral fat was basically really from insulin resistance. So now let's talk about the ugly stuff when it comes to the body fat percentage. And the ugly is something that's kind of insidious, and I wouldn't have paid attention to if I didn't go get a DEXA scan. So this is called visceral fat. Visceral fat is the fat that sits around your organs, and you can't really easily detect it from skin folds. I've done skin folds on many people where I estimate their body fat percentage, and it turns out that they're like 20, sometimes 15% higher than that. And I even try to use a different methodology of teaming up a waist, neck, and hip ratio, which can roughly, very crudely determine body fat percentage. So if you go online and you look up waist, neck, and hip ratio, there's an equation. For females, you used waist and hip and neck and height. For males, it's waist, neck, and height. And it'll very crudely estimate your body fat percentage. And I say crude because it can have me very high when I'm very lean. Like I've been very lean body fat percentage, and it has me very high. But sometimes it'll actually be relatively closer, or at very least it anchors the number from the skin folds because the skin folds be low. So when I take the average of the skin fold with the waist, neck, and hip ratio and I team them up, then it gets pretty close to a DEXA scan for some people. But then some people, it's still like, because of their visceral fat, because we just can't detect it, it is way higher. And what's really important about visceral fat, there's two major things. One, it's like, it's very unhealthy. This is the stuff that is surrounding your organs in your stomach. And so sometimes that you might notice someone has very lean arms, lean legs, but a big stomach. They probably have a lot of visceral fat as well. And the visceral fat, and this, again, credit to Body Measure for even pointing this out, is from insulin resistance. And so insulin resistance happens when you're having too many carbs, maybe too many carbs and fats, and your basically not eating healthy. Now, the first time I ever discovered this was back in 2018 when I first did it. And the visceral fat number that I had was at point 0.5. And I believe they say you want to be under 0.5. So it's not super unhealthy, but it was close to the line. Now, that was higher, and I was not too surprised because when I look back at that number, I was like, okay, well, that would have been during the summer. During summers, that time of my life, I was binging on food more. So me having more insulin resistant kind of made sense. I typically what do is get lean for the summer. And then once it's the summer, I'm having a lot more smoke weed and binge sessions, right? And those binge sessions will actually massively skyrocket your insulin because you're having a ton of carbs and fats, you're binging. And that makes sense why I would end up in that state for sure. The next couple body compositions I had, like, so when I did it before the bodybuilding show, which I was very impressed with. So this was when I was prepping for the show, not prepping, like the build phase going to the show. So this would have been end of January, and I would have been finishing a build phase. What really amazes me is like I had zero visceral fat, and I think my binges like much more reduced over the years. But I even remember having a good binge session before this, so I was actually genuinely pretty impressed. I may have done like a week of deficits. I can't really remember going into it, but still very impressed that it was zero. Obviously, after the show, it was zero because I was heavily dieting. Then when I did my end of my build phase last year, I was at 0.15, so a little bit up. Again, you're coming from a surplus. Even that would have been a month after holidays. Like it came up again, went down after the deficit again. And this time, and again, this is the ugly one, is I got to 0.62. That's not a pretty number. So I'm over that 0.5 number that they say is in a healthy range. So I am in the unhealthy range. But again, it was post holidays. I'm not lying. I went from, around 213, 214 pounds to 224 pounds over the course of a couple of weeks. And I didn't even feel like I necessarily binged more, which was interesting because that's historically my issue. I can think of social events where I just wouldn't stop eating and food was an obsession. And I didn't feel that this time, but I did started to recognize that I was snacking a lot more and snacking heavily processed things. So if there was cookies around, I just have a snack, and it's usually what would make my mistake in basically a build phase where you get the build phase fuckets where you're essentially, yeah, I'll just have a little bit more. I got to hit my calorie. And bear in mind, a week prior, I was having a hard time hitting my calorie goal. But I think it all spiraled right around when I started to make cookies for everyone. That's where I think that's where it's like a lot of sugar and fat together is a metabolic storm, right? Because fats are very dense, sugar are high glycemic. And so you're just setting yourself up to be like just eating a lot of calories. It tastes great. And it's just not good for your system. That's where you're going to end up with insulin resistance, eating a lot of those hyperpalatable foods, high quantities. And so I'm surprised it's that high, but not completely surprised because, I did eat pretty good for the couple of weeks there over the holidays. So I think one of the things for me to really pay attention to here is I'd say number one, snacking over holidays, because you can't blame the holidays entirely because it's like 2 to 3 meals, right? Like you have Christmas Eve. Let's say you have 3 to 4 gatherings, right? Three to 4 meals. You got your one family. I got my family, Angelina's family. We had Angelina's dinner. We had New Year's one. I had my mom. So there's 5, but these are just like 5 dinners. There's a lot of meals in between there. It's the in between. It's the before Christmas and after Christmas, in between the New Year's. Those are the real problem areas for myself and anyone to pay attention to, because that's when we can kind of snack here and there, and then the food's around. And I always tell people, you got to remember, like the idea of food scarcity gets in your head. This baking is only around right now, and so you just keep snacking it. And I think it's, again, I'll just come back to the snacking is what I have to really be paying attention to when it's the holidays, especially when I'm making the baking. I will eat the baking, and I know I ate a lot of the imperial stuff this year. I think that's where I'd say it really was the cascade of events that led to me overeating over the holidays. But the snacking just makes sense that you would put yourself into a perpetual state of high sugar. Think about the difference between having like two big meals or 6 to 7 small ones on your blood sugar. So I even want to take a step back here to make sure you understand what happens with high blood sugar, insulin resistance, and even leading to, diabetes. So essentially, what happens is when normally with eating sugar, any sort of carb, depending on the type of carb, it might rise a certain rate, like it might rise steady, which would be a low glycemic carb. Medium glycemic is faster, high glycemic is really quick. And the processed stuff, like the candy bars, anything with processed sugar, comes really high fast because it's a super efficient delivery system. It gets into your blood really quick within a half hour. And then from there, it should come back down. Insulin comes into the body because that's the signal is you've had too much sugar, body recognizes it. You got to put insulin in the blood, and the blood will tell the body, let's uptake the sugar in some way. And if your muscles are in need of carbs, the body will absorb the sugar and put it into the muscle for carbs for your exercise. If you don't need it in the muscle because the muscle cell is full and saturated, which can happen quite quickly to people if you're not doing a lot of high intensity sports or just eating a lot of carbs, your body then has to convert it. So it has to put it into the liver, has to put it into the fat cells, convert it into fats. So that is where carbs can turn to fats. Now, let's say you're a healthy individual and you had a high glycemic carb or any sort of carb. But by the end of the day, even if that did temporarily get stored as fat, if you're in a calorie deficit, that fat that might have been temporarily stored burns off. So it doesn't really matter. What matters is when people are perpetually doing the high carbs and storing and storing and storing and ending up in a calorie surplus. Now, because if you always have a lot of high carbs, like high glycemic carbs, high carbs for sure, like routinely, the blood sugar comes up and it tries to come down with the insulin, but then you have more because you're having a stack. So, it brings it back up and come back down. Oh, you got to have another one. Oh, you're bringing it back up. So now you have this perpetual state of high blood sugar. So imagine now that because you're just trying to snack, maybe the higher carb things I was doing during the holidays, higher carb, sometimes they're mixed with protein. Don't get me wrong. I have like 220, 240 grams of protein a day, which will blunt it a bit. But because I'm not letting that blood sugar come down, I'm not having, I would still have a lot of vegetables, but because you keep having the higher glycemic stuff, that it perpetually brings up the blood sugar. Versus if you were to have two meals and it, maybe it was a mixed meal and it brought up the blood sugar a little bit and then it bring it down. And I'm not trying to be an advocate for only two meals. I'm just comparing the two. And then it brings it down and it gets to a steady amount. So for 2 to 3 or 4 hours, you don't eat, and you eat again, and then you have a bigger meal, and then you bring it down. So let's say 3 meals like that, rather than someone having 6 where the blood sugar comes up, it's about to go down, and then you hammer it again with more sugar, and you hammer it again with more sugar. You keep increasing insulin in your body. Your body has to keep producing it. Now, what happens when you do this over many, I want to say, many years, I still got insulin resistant. It doesn't even take years apparently. Over many weeks, days, is that your muscle cell or your body's signaling cells will actually have a harder time paying attention to insulin. Basically, imagine that it's someone who keeps knocking on the door and be like, hey, can you open up? And it's like, if it's once in a while, it's like, yeah, I'll open up. It's like, here's your mail. Okay, thanks. Close the mail. And it's like, comes back 3 or 4 hours later. Hey, open up. It's like, yeah, okay, you got mail. Okay. It's like, hey, open up. Okay, I get it. Close the door. Hey, open up. No, I don't want him. I don't want to open it up. And that's kind of what your body does. It's like, I don't want to open up anymore. I'm so sick of this insulin. I don't care. And so this happens when you end up constantly aggravating the system with a lot of carbs. So if you're eating every hour and a half, every hour, and higher glycemic foods, this is a problem. And especially if you're someone who likes to snack a lot, doesn't like to eat big meals, not really sure your total calorie intake, not eating enough high protein. And I even have high protein, so that's not the only thing. but there's a good chance that you can end up making yourself more insulin resistant if you don't try to have more whole food meals at one serving rather than spreading it out through all these little snacks throughout the day. So it's something to really consider for overall health. You know, I sign up clients and I tell them to eat a big whole food meal. They say it's too much food. Routinely, they say it's too much food. And then they start eating it. They don't feel hungry for 3 or 4 hours later. Sometimes throughout the whole day, they're like, man, this is almost too much food to put down for the end of the day. Well, that much food puts you in a calorie deficit. So whatever you were eating prior was putting you in a calorie surplus if you're coming to me for weight loss. So, which means that the way that you're eating it and the food types you're eating are making it really easy to eat too many calories. And there's research to show that if you have bigger meals rather than spread out the meals, it's actually more satisfying to eat the bigger meal because it'll have a better staying power for satiety and fullness. So that's something I definitely learned, is that I have to, even myself, be very cautious of insulin resistance. And so I think I really got to pay attention to those things when I'm doing a build phase, when I'm, on the holidays, anything like that. No, what was really funny is that as the cut started here, I got into my, Cookie Monster cut. I'll talk about more later. So I got into my fat loss phase here. In the first week, I was hungry. Like I was like, oh man. And I wanted to give credit to the metabolism because, as I'd mentioned, my metabolism clearly was running very high. If I couldn't gain weight prior to the holidays, like it's not that I couldn't, it was just harder, right? I noticed too, one of the podcasts, the last podcast I did, I was very fidgety. And this is a very known thing that people having a high metabolism will actually naturally want to move more. And fidgeting is one of the things. I don't love all the information that Andrew Huberman says, but one of the most interesting research articles he brought up was that a calf bounce actually could burn a decent amount of calories throughout the whole day. I'm not telling my clients to bounce their calf. I'm telling them that this is why some people will have a metabolic advantage because they'll bounce that calf without thinking about it. And for me, I noticed I just didn't want to stop moving during the podcast because I had been near calorie maintenance for so long. My body's just so ready to burn energy, which is really cool, right? Post holidays, I'm noticing this appetite. It's like, oh man, I'm really hungry. It must have been, my metabolism's just so high, which I'm not saying isn't a part of it, but I'm willing to bet that based on this visceral fat number, I'm probably more insulin resistant and I'm probably having a hard time regulating my blood sugar as good as I used to. I'm not at the zero anymore, right? And now, even really thinking about it as I'm talking on the show here, is I had a way easier time going from my calorie surplus before my bodybuilding show. I did my build, and I went from 27 to 3,000 calories to 2,000 calories. And I did that overnight. Like I had no problem, didn't need to ease down. Now, there is always a substantial motivation for someone going to do a competition. Like bodybuilding will put me lock in. Like you're hungry, doesn't matter. Like I can just deal with it. And when I did my cut last year, I intentionally eased into it. I intentionally didn't push it. But this year I tried to do closer to 2,000. I'm like, oh man, I'm hungry. And I really feel like that has a lot to do with the visceral fat number, this insulin resistance, because I was 0% visceral fat when I was getting ready for the bodybuilding show. So it makes sense why there was a couple hard days, but I could manage it. But this time I couldn't manage it as well. Like it's way harder. I'm having a hard time eating closer to 2,000 calories. I also have a lot more lean mass, which I'll talk about too. But I do think this is something that I need to pay attention to and something for you to pay attention to. I'm not saying that you have to go get a DEXA scan to go figure out your visceral fat. But if you carry a lot of weight in your stomach and not in your arms very much, and you don't feel like you have a really good diet, this is an important thing to pay attention to because this is the most unhealthy way for you to hold any body fat. And what you can pay attention to now is have more intentional meals, have more solid amount of protein, low glycemic carbs, and fiber at each meal. And I'm not saying not to have snacks. I still have snacks, but keep those low glycemic maybe. And if you don't plan at least 3 solid meals a day, and you think, well, I have like maybe two, and then I snack 3 or 4 times, you could be setting yourself up for something. I'm not saying it's guaranteed. I'm just saying it's something you might want to consider. I think one of the last things I want to just notice my own personal lesson from the holidays. Maybe you can take it. It's up to you. I need to remember to eat more fruit throughout the holidays. As funny as that simple thing, but it's such a simple thing that dawned on me. It's like I wasn't craving an apple or a grape. Why? I was eating cookies. I was like, well, I'd rather have a cookie. I'd rather have, this chocolate. I'd rather have this. And it's like treats stop becoming treats really quick. They became like my sweet thing rather than my treat thing. And my sweet thing should still be fruit. It should still be the apples. Like all those habits should still be there. But with that being said, I want to come back to not necessarily guilting myself for everything that happened over the holidays. I don't think anyone should really try to stay in guilt. I try to talk about this all the time. It's not bad to feel the feeling of guilt necessarily. Some people might disagree with me on this, but I think that guilt is a signal from your body. We have this in our system for a reason. If you did something immoral to someone, you feel guilty, that's a good sign. There is a reason why we feel it, because it's a signal and an indication you did something not in line with your values. And so if you feel guilty over food, well, then you did something not in line to your value towards your health. But you don't need to stay there. Let's say you did something to wrong someone, you did something that made you feel guilty, you apologize to that person. And you say, I'm sorry, I did that to you. I didn't mean to. And then you're able to forgive yourself, as hopefully that individual is able to forgive you. And so if you've wronged yourself by eating something unhealthy, an unhealthy amount of things, well, forgive yourself. You made a mistake. That happens. And I think when someone's able, this was big for myself. When someone's able to forgive themselves for making the mistake of overeating something, it helps you give some time to calm down and ask yourself why, to look into that moment. So let's say you overate some family dinner, or just, sometime by yourself, just binged after a family dinner, which I'm certainly guilty of. And you just feel guilty. Like you just live in that guilt. And it's like, well, do you know why you overate? It's like, I don't know. So because you're so like, you just even thinking about it, just clouded with anger and frustration and guilt. But if you actually ask yourself, did you know you were going to do that beforehand? It's like, well, no, I don't think I did. I was hoping I wasn't going to. Okay, so you didn't know. Now you are technically a different person than you were prior to that binge or that splurge. I'm a different person prior to the holidays. I didn't go in with the intention of going all out over the holidays. I went in with the intention to treat myself, to have some fun foods along the way. But I definitely have something to learn from this. And I can pinpoint it by just saying, okay, I'm now a different person, and I now need to pay attention to eating more fruit throughout the holidays, not allowing myself to snack routinely, and being aware that this kind of result can happen if I don't catch myself on it. And so for yourself, when you have, the holidays or whatever it is, give yourself some ounce of forgiveness first, and then ask yourself, okay, why did that version of me think that? And then how can the new version of me learn from it? What's a behavior that we can replace from that very moment, rather than just say, hey, I'm just going to have this cookie. I'm just going to have this. Well, eating some fruit can go a long way. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a depiction on, if you do have the habit of snacking a lot, if you did feel guilty over the holidays, not to worry about it too much, but to learn from it. I don't think you have to deny the feeling of guilt initially, but you don't stay in it. If you ask yourself to forgive yourself, then you can move forward from it with a new lesson. Okay, next part, lean mass. This is actually probably why I wasn't too heartbroken about the body fat percentage, because I grew a lot of muscle. It looks like, well, more than ever. Let's just put it that way. I have on record from what they've ever had me do a body composition assessment, this is the most muscle mass I've ever had. And so, you go back years when I first did the body DEXA scan, I was at 161 pounds of lean mass. And then that was when I was, higher body fat percentage. And then right before I did my bodybuilding show, when it was the first time I ever intentionally really tried to build, and I got up to 178.3 lean mass, and then cut down, went back down. I lost a lot of lean mass over the bodybuilding prep, went down to 164. But then I did the build phase again, the year after, went up to 180. So the whole year after that, put up more mass, right? So that's great. And what was really interesting is from the bodybuilding prep initially, the bodybuilding mass building, the bulk, if you will, that time I spent like 6 days a week. I was doing so much building. I was very competitive about trying to build muscle. Now, again, I did do a mini cut in the fall for it and an aggressive one. So that definitely would have affected it. And so my build phase would have been about 3 to 4 weeks. And I think I did a pretty good job of the calories, like staying near a maintenance of surplus for that. But I was honestly doing so much volume as far as just days in the gym, sets, and everything. And then the year after, just in 2023, this would have been the start of 2024, like a year ago. I was at 180 pounds on lean mass, and that's already, a couple pounds up from that and less time in the gym. I was trying to do more rest pause sets, and I'm going to talk about all the strategies that go into this. And then I cut down 174 going into the summer. So lost 6 pounds of lean mass during the cut. And the cut I did last spring, I do fully admit, and I talked about it on the show, is that I did not do enough volume. I could see it in my arms. You can see it in the DEXA scan. I lost too much muscle tissue because I was trying to do a minimum effective dose. And I learned that I didn't do the minimum, not for me. I think some people could actually get away with 3 to 4 workouts a week, doing 30 minutes. But if you're used to doing 5 days a week, 6 days a week, you're going to lose the mass. Like the best analogy or best, it's an analogy or best sentiment I heard is come home with the person who took you to the dance, or dance with the partner that took you to the dance. Essentially, I did the volume to get there. You got to maintain close to the same volume to maintain the muscle. And so from 174, it got up to 183. So let's just kind of, one build phase, 178, the next build phase, 180. And then this last one, 183. So more lean mass than ever. And that's a really good sign because I was trying to build. I was trying not to do any cutting. So this was, although I did put on more body fat, I got more muscle mass than ever. Now, it's not just that I put on muscle mass this time. It was where I put on muscle mass this time. And I very intentionally knew starting in the summer, going into the fall, I did for about 2 to 3 phases of focusing on arms and delts, my lateral delts, specifically the side of the shoulder. And so I wanted to see, okay, could I grow it? Could this specific region grow? So to cut these numbers short, just to keep it simplified, is my build phase. I'll just talk about the build phases because they're the most useful, right? So where are you at the end of the most building you could do in the last few years? So a couple of years ago, before the bodybuilding show, I had 27.3 pounds of lean mass in the arms. Last year, I had 27.5, just a little bit more. And this year, 28.8. So well over a pound, 1.3 pounds of lean mass in my arms, which, although it's like, it's like a pound in your arms, that's a lot of muscle, right? And I noticed it. I personally, it's just good to have the objective number, but I noticed it personally looking in photos and in the mirror. And so the really cool thing too there from the arms is that my right arm usually was a lot smaller than my left. And this I felt was mostly due to my shoulder issue. So my right shoulder, I had surgery on years ago. And it basically just, if I go too hard on it, it hurts, right? So that was the limitation. It wasn't the volume difference. I was always trying to do the same volume. But and when we were doing the bodybuilding prep, I talked about it, if you followed any of those episodes, that during my prep, I had to do more sets on my right arm and my left because it just wasn't as big of a bicep. It wasn't big of a tricep. So I had to do that because you want as much symmetry as a bodybuilder. So this time there's symmetrical, but I didn't try to compensate volume. I will say I do a lot of dumbbell stuff. I do a lot of single arm stuff for my arms for sure. But I'll actually attribute this to better shoulder health, that I can actually push it better. And I'll attribute that to using something called the crack method of PNF stretching. PNF stretching is proprioception neuromuscular facilitation, fancy word, but basically It's a way that we hijack the nervous system to allow someone to go into a deeper stretch. That's actually what foam rolling does. If you foam roll your muscle, it really relaxes it so you feel more relaxed. And so the sensors that would normally feel the tension are just silenced. And so if you do a foam rolling session on your chest and then you go to stretch your chest, you can get deeper because they are numbed. Now, the PNF is another way to numb that sensor. And the crack method is contract with an agonist contraction. And so basically, let's use the chest one that I do all the time. If you haven't seen it, it's on my Instagram. You can look up the crack method of chest stretching. But basically, I go onto a bench and I lay myself flat on a bench. I have 2 plates. I started with 5s, like maybe 10s, but I started very light to get as deep as I could in that stretch, deep, 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 where I could barely touch the ground with these plates. And so I'm in a very deep stretch, and I hold that for about 20 seconds. And then I would come up and I contract it just off the ground. Now, at this position, although I can bench press a ton, I'm contracting. I am very weak there, very weak in the muscle. So I'm trying to strengthen the muscle at the far end stretched range. Then what I do is after 20-second hold, I push back and I try to actually pull the opposite muscle, my traps, and I push them back and I put the weights into the ground. I'm trying to drive the weights into the ground because I just basically used the muscle, I try to create tension on the muscle by contracting it. When you go to stretch the muscle, it's a bit numbed. The sensor won't turn on as quick to tell you you're too stretched. And so that's what the PNF is all about, is like, how can we tell the sensor to allow you to go deeper? And so I'm going deeper for 20 seconds and then I do a passive. So it's passive 20 seconds, contract just off the ground for 20 seconds, push into the ground for 20 seconds, and passive again. And I would do that 3 times before each of my bench days. Then I would also do that for my overhead position. So there's a lat version, I do it from it as well. And in both of these, I also then finish off with like an activation, a big deep stretch activation, about 10 to 15 reps. My shoulders just got better. Now, not perfect. I still have bad shoulder days. I still have days it's tired. I think due to the fact that they've literally sutured it, like the labrum, like the thing that happened in the joint, so much damage that it's just going to have issues. But this stretching technique alone has made more impact on my shoulder than anything I've ever done. Anything I've ever done. And I'm not even lying about that. The only thing it compares to is when I used to do Turkish get-ups, and Turkish get-ups weren't helping this. I was doing them a lot last year and they didn't help. But this is super impactful. So couldn't recommend that enough. And then when I'm doing my arms, right, I'm going to push hard on my arms. I just don't get the same aggravation anymore. I'm able to push good volume. And so I feel like that's where my body's been able to find more of a balance between the left and right arm. You can't really measure the chest and back as well, but kind of. It's like, it would be your trunk. And so my chest and back is a pound up. But it wasn't my focus. It was like build it up a little bit. For the most part, I had done most of my arms. And the other thing I want to say as a tip was not just making sure your shoulders are healthy, but the most important thing that if you want to build muscle to a specific region, high frequency, such a difference, right? So I noticed this when I was doing my bodybuilding show. We tried to do it for my lats and hamstrings. And this time I was like, okay, I'm going to do it for my arms. So I would do arms 3 days a week. I would have a day of arms, take a couple days off, another day, and I would mix it in with other things. Like I wasn't just doing arms. I would always do my lower uppers, but I would make sure every like 3 days a week I had to hit my shoulder and arms. And I did that for at least, I would say 3 months, if not longer. And then just as like an efficiency for how I was setting up my workouts, I felt like my arms were actually getting pretty smoked. They were getting pretty tired. So I just went back to hitting them twice a week. So that's one major tip, that if you want a specific region to be brought up, something that's a higher priority, try to fit it in your schedule at a higher frequency, even if it's just like one like exercise that you do, right? You don't necessarily have to do it 3 or 4 or 5 different exercises for that muscle group. Sometimes I just hit a set of delts, lateral delts. I hit multiple sets, but I just hit lateral delts. Often it was only one exercise, but I would do many sets of them. And it's a great way because then your body would recover. Rather than doing one whole day of shoulders, I had shoulders spread out throughout the whole week. So hit it at higher frequency. And then the other major thing, I'm going to keep talking about it because I think there's something to these rest pause sets. Do the rest pause sets. Now, the rest pause sets, just to remind you what it is, it's when you push a hard set near failure. Like it's a hard set. And always remember, a hard set for muscle building is when you cannot do the speed that you started with. So if you have a set of 10 and you're at, around rep 7 and it's like, oh man, it's slowing down a lot, those are effective reps. And that's when you know you're going into a hard set. If your speed is consistent throughout, I'm not saying it didn't do anything, but for muscle building, very minimal. So make sure we're talking about that is a hard set. Now I do a hard set and I still might leave reps in reserve. It doesn't have to be max effort. I actually routinely like leaving 1 rep in reserve, even on a hard week. But I would push near failure, 1 or 2 reps shy of failure. I will rest by counting in my head, 10-second count, and then I'll do somewhere around 1 to 4 reps again. If you can hit 5 to 6 or 7, you probably didn't push your set hard enough to begin with, which is okay. It's not great. The idea is that it shouldn't be time consuming. If I do a hard set and I can only get maybe on average, I would get 2 reps. On average, if I did it effectively, I was close enough to failure. I got 1, 2, count 10 seconds in my head, pick the weight up, I do it again, and I hit 2 more reps. Now that's 1 rest pause set. So I do 1 set that's hard, and then I would do, that's its own thing. Like that's its own building stimulus. And then I would do an additional rest pause set, even if it's 2 reps. I kind of counted that towards being similar to, not perfect, like another hard set. And so if I want to accumulate so many hard sets per week, and that's how you basically track your muscle building, how many hard sets have you done per week? I would include the rest pause sets into that equation. So tangible lesson here is that if you want to grow, make sure that you're trying to do good frequency. Okay. If you have a specific muscle group, even if it's only one like exercise, you do maybe 2 or 3 sets where you get some rest pause set, it'll make an effect over a long period of time. By the way, this is over 6 months and a lot of muscle building, a lot of experience. So just be patient, but it does help. And then try to accumulate how many sets you can do per week. That will really help. So if I did, 3 hard sets of lateral flies, that's 3 for my delts, then some additional rest pause. I did 3 rest pause. Okay, I'm going to call that 6 sets for the delts on that day. And if I can do that on another day with a couple other exercises, you just accumulate that. And being somewhere near 10 to 20 sets near failure will help you grow substantially. On top of, again, always being a calorie surplus and getting your rest. Okay, one more number to go over here, and that is the relative skeletal mass index. And this is basically the amount of skeletal mass that you have in your legs and arms based on your height. And so it's just how dense you are based on your height, essentially. You have the BMI, which is your body mass index, commonly used in a lot of research. And some people really don't like that number because if you have a lot of muscle mass, you're not going to track well. I am obese for sure. But that is because it doesn't take into consideration the amount of lean mass someone has. And lean mass index is actually a great one. And this is similar to that. I'll talk about their relative skeletal mass index first, and then I'll talk about the lean mass index as well. So one of the main contacts I chat with at Body Measure is Erica, and she, again, will be on the podcast soon, and she was really pumped about this number. So anything above 11 is already a really good number it's considered the athletic population. And in previous years, I already had good numbers. They were already really impressed with the one I had years ago, which was 13.73. That's what I did before the first bodybuilding build phase. And then the year after that, at the end of the build phase, I was at 1406. And this year at 14.35, bigger than ever, right? Not surprising. All the other numbers are up. And what was really cool was talking to Erica, and she said, just compared to all of her other clients that she has, they have over 5,000 clients, is that I think within the upper 3 or 5 of all the clients that she has, as far as having that high RSMI score. So within their client population, which, by the way, would be skewed, they're going to have a decent amount. Most people are going to be going there for fat loss. I think it's a lot more rare for people who are leaner worrying about doing a DEXA scan unless they're getting ready for a bodybuilding show. Even then, bodybuilders don't really need to know it. Like even talking to AJ when we were prepping for the show, he didn't really care what my body fat percentage was. He's like, I just care how you look. So they don't really need that number as much. So it's still a skewed population. So at the end of the day, I'm still pumped because she had said the people who I'm even close to within the top three are both unnatural athletes that actually come to see her. And so she's quite impressed that I hit this SMRI score so high in comparison to the population that she's seen. So this score actually led me to be really curious about where my lean body mass index would be. And it's a similar idea. I think it's just calculated slightly different because they have a specific equation they use for the RSMI score. But the lean body mass index is essentially your lean body mass in kilograms divided by your height squared. And so it's similar to body mass index because that's your body mass divided by your height squared. So you just take into consideration how much lean mass you have rather than how much fat mass you have, which makes total sense. Because if someone doesn't have a really good fat mass or doesn't has a lot of fat mass, but they don't have a lot of lean body mass, and you take that into consideration with the equation, you're going to understand their health a lot more because some people can just have, as myself, like I would be obese, at least overweight. I haven't calculated my BMI in a long time. So I wouldn't fit into that category as likely. And I'll just say, like, as a side point, BMI is still very useful for people who are unhealthy. It's not always an indication if someone's unhealthy, though. As you know, if myself, if you use my BMI, I'm not going to fit into a lot of these predictors of what BMI predicts because I strength train, I eat protein, I do a lot of these things. If someone is not physically healthy, like not trying to exercise, someone is not trying to eat well, I think BMI is probably useful. Not always, but I think often. And I've even heard the researchers say it's still accurate for most people because most people aren't doing enough. So it doesn't mean that it hits everyone, but a lot of research is trying to generalize. So that's why BMI is used. And not everyone can figure out their BMI, or sorry, their lean body mass index. So my lean body mass index, this is where I just got to say, and I think I'm probably just trying to toot my own horn here a little bit too hard, but get ready, toot toot. Lean body mass index here that I calculated, or to be fair, I got ChatGPT to calculate it and to give me where I fit in within percentiles. And so my lean body mass index was 27.47. The average lean body mass for men typically peaks around 8 to 9 kilograms per meter squared. And for women, it's around 15 to 16 per kilogram per meter squared. Certain athletic sports like weightlifting, bodybuilding may show lean body masses above 25, but even within these groups, it's uncommon to have much higher. So this is where I really wanted to quiz ChatGPT and be like, okay, well, what's the data out there on lean body mass? Like, who has a really high lean body mass above 27? And general population, less than 0.1% of the population will have a lean body mass score above 27. And so that's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool because they even mentioned like biological limits. So it's really difficult for people to get that kind of muscle mass built on their frame. And again, I think it goes back to me embracing that I'm a big guy. I'm not trying to stay at a high body fat percentage, but I do like that I've embraced being a bigger person and that it's actually led to a better relationship with food. Again, holidays are the holidays, and I still got things to learn there. But I would just say it just definitely changes the way I feel about my goals or, who I'm trying to be because I am good at being big. And so the fun part here to me too is I ain't done building. I mean, I'm not in a build phase right now, but who's to say I can't get bigger next year, right? So I do a nice little cut phase here for a month or so. And then after that, let's see if we can get the arms a little bit bigger, right? And I wanted to dive into the Cookie Monster Cut challenge that I'm doing. I talked about it a little bit on one of the previous podcasts, but I just want to give a little bit more of what it really is and then also describe how it's already going. And so cookie every day is the fundamental thing. And I'm going to be trying to get as lean as I can within 60 days. And to be honest, I even think that there's a chance that I might have to push my cut longer, but I'm doing at least 60 days of the Cookie Monster Cut version of it. And I got to say, it's already actually kind of hard because if you're trying to fit in cookies, some of the cookies I've been picking up are like too big. And this is just, accountability on my part. I could eat half a cookie. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just want to eat the whole cookie. But it has been hard because I make a mistake of waiting until the end of the day to eat the cookie. And it's like, oh man, you only have this many calories left. I guess I'm not going to have that much of a calorie deficit and I'm hungry. So I think I need to shift my style and technique a little bit here and there to make sure that I want to maybe buy smaller cookies, whatever it is. But I have already found it more challenging than predicted. And part of this, as I already mentioned, probably due to my blood sugar actually being harder to regulate than I initially thought it would be at the start of the cut. So starting to get a little bit of a better groove going here this week. But I've already had to learn foods on the go. Like I have to have things planned. I'm having a lot of these mistakes a lot of people make, where it's like if you don't account for the calories, you have a hard time doing it. It's hard to fit things in, right? So there's a lot to be learned on this, just like any other challenge. But once I feel like life in general has just had a lot of events coming up, once I get into more of I want to say the routine winter haul here, less events and stuff, I think I can get her going pretty good and just trying to choose more appropriate serving sizes of the cookie. And then one other thing to mention is that I did talk about this before on one of the last podcasts, is that I am getting into the powerlifting challenge coming up here. And now it's in. Like I've signed up with my powerlifting coach. I've talked about it. I'm already working with a therapist online. Powerlifting therapist is Dr. Jamie. I'm going to try to enunciate this right. Guggenlock. And she is from the States. She works online, but she's great. She's been super, direct with everything. I can message her constantly. We're working on my hip and my knee, and hey, I'm getting stronger. So, I already hit some PRs, in the past of the sumo. Now it's getting my squat and bench up, and really excited to see how that goes. And again, I'm going to do videos on how very analytical we've been, very like systematic, learning new methodologies on how I prep for everything. I have to get my whole brace down, get my squat ready. I have this certain routine I got to do to prep my hips and understanding how to brace. So many things being learned just working with her. And then I just, met up with Curtis. Curtis Taylor has been on the show before, meets with a ton of top level powerlifting guys in the local area. I'll just say this: Curtis has got 4 athletes that he will probably win nationals this year, which is like, it's not even just going to nationals, win nationals. Like, I think that's incredible. So my friend Quinn's gone to him, got great success. And we just already had a good meeting this last week, going over the squat and bench. And we're going to meet this weekend for the deadlift. And I'm really excited for that. So with that, I think the exciting thing is that there's a meet in March and then another meet in May. So my goal is to do at least 2 lifts this year, two lifting meets, already hitting that. And if it goes well, and I feel up to it in the fall, there's potential, and like it has to go well enough for me to qualify, maybe even do a national challenge in the fall. But I got to take it, one competition at a time, get my joints through one competition at a time. But I want to tell more about this and my journey, but it's early, so there's not too much to tell you too much yet. But I have a lot I'm going to learn from this. So on to the powerlifting challenges. I did want to take a break from the bodybuilding to focus on powerlifting. So I'm really excited for this year because I'll have a lot of lessons that I know I can hopefully teach you. I think with that being said, maybe one other lesson for you, or I call it a piece of advice, maybe. If you notice, I do this routine. I think maybe I do it because my brand, maybe I do it because my personality, but I go after challenges on purpose. I could just do a calorie deficit and be whatever. I feel like I learned something from this. I learned something from my clients. I try to showcase something to my clients. I already have probably what I'm going to do for a cut next year planned out. And I learn for myself and for my clients, but you'll learn anytime you do a challenge, even if the challenge doesn't pan out. Someone encourages you to do a fat loss challenge, don't be afraid to try it as long as it doesn't feel like it's an unhealthy process. That's why I offered fat loss challenges in the past. That's why I offer the free group that I run, because every single time when I did keto, I did carnivore, I did anything, like I learned something from the process. They weren't sustainable diets, but it was a matter of understanding what that food would do for me and just saying, hey, I'm doing this for this time period. Who am I in that time period? And what do I like about that person? And I learned a lot. And I learned from the fast food fat loss a ton from that. I learned a ton from the bodybuilding. I know I'm going to learn from the powerlifting. I know I'm going to learn from this cookie diet. Is ironically, I'm actually already kind of getting sick of cookies. And that's only like a week and a half in. But the main thing here is Don't be afraid to try challenges. If someone offers you a challenge to join them, a walking challenge that I've done in the past, like anything, don't be afraid to. Just say, hey, who can I be? And even if it doesn't pan out perfectly, even if you get 2 weeks in, you were someone different for 2 weeks. Did you learn something from that? And that's something you can take forever. Every single attempt isn't a failure. It's an attempt. It's trial and error. So whatever it is for fitness, for nutrition, weight loss, don't be afraid to try challenges. Don't be afraid to just say, who could I be for this period of time under these parameters? And how do I feel about that person in the process? And with that being said, don't forget that I have the do-it-yourself fitness group. Now, I am all about you doing any challenge that's right for you, and you're going to know what's right for you. But I do have something totally free. So if you don't know about the do-it-yourself fitness group, check out my Instagram, as I have a whole series right on there. It's pinned right to the top of my profile. But basically, you can join the do-it-yourself fitness group for free. And I put in a ton of work here. I have all these video trainings I give my clients, and I made even extra ones for the do-it-yourself fitness members. And it's a Facebook group that has a do-it-yourself portal that has all the information you need to make your own diet, make your own training, plus extra mindset stuff. And I'm always adding to the library of resources. So that's something that you can consider for a simple fat loss challenge or even a muscle building challenge, whatever information you want to use in there. And hopefully it's something that sends you the right path. So with that being said, I hope you learned a lot from this episode. I always, love it if you can share this, refer this to someone who might find this stuff interesting, because that's the only way that this podcast grows is through referrals. And with that being said, I hope you took something for yourself. As I just mentioned, I encourage you to go after something that can challenge you, something that can make you grow, because life is not about the pursuit of happiness, but rather the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.